The words burned like acid. "You're too irresponsible, Abby." My father's voice was cold, clinical, as if diagnosing a disease rather than dismantling his daughter's dreams. Across the polished mahogany table that had witnessed 2 decades of family business meetings, my younger sister Olivia sat with perfect posture, her eyes downcast in mock sympathy, while our father handed her my birthright, the company I'd poured my soul into for years. My name is Abigail Parker, Abby to most, and I'm 30 years old now. But that day, that awful, shattering day, I was 25, watching everything I'd worked for being handed to someone else simply because I didn't fit my father's narrow definition of responsible. The worst part? For years, I believed him. Have you ever had a family member dismiss your potential so completely that you questioned your own worth? Have you watched someone else receive the recognition you deserved, while you were labeled the family disappointment? If you have, then you know that hollow ache that settles in your chest and never quite leaves. Parker and Daughters Coffee Roasters wasn't just a business to me. It was our legacy, a humble coffee cart my father transformed into the Pacific Northwest's most beloved local chain. I had coffee grounds in my veins and roasting techniques memorized before I could drive, but none of that mattered when my father decided I wasn't worthy of carrying that legacy forward. I'm sharing my story today because what happened next changed everything, not just for me, but for my entire family. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or unfairly judged, please stay with me. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more stories about family justice finally being served, because sometimes the people who doubt you the most are the ones who end up needing you the most. Growing up in Seattle, as Robert Parker's daughter, meant living in the shadow of ambition. My father built his coffee empire with calloused hands and relentless determination. He was respected, feared even, by competitors who couldn't match his obsessive attention to quality. At home, that same intensity transformed into high expectations that hung over our dinner table like storm clouds. My mother Susan was our buffer, warm where my father was cold, flexible where he was rigid. She'd slip me encouraging notes on days when my father's criticism became too sharp. "He loves you," she'd whisper. "He just doesn't know how to show it." I clung to those words on countless nights. Then there was Olivia, my sister, 2 years younger and seemingly perfect in every way. While I struggled with calculus, she breezed through advanced classes. When I fumbled through piano recitals, she played Chopin with effortless grace. I loved her fiercely, but sometimes that love was tangled with a jealousy I wasn't proud of. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" The question became a refrain in our household, each repetition another tiny fracture in my self-confidence. I wasn't reckless or truly irresponsible, I was different. I saw beauty and spontaneity in experiences that couldn't be quantified on academic transcripts. At 19, when my carefully selected business school acceptance letters arrived, I shocked everyone by deferring enrollment to backpack through Europe instead. "You're throwing away your future," my father thundered. But I went anyway. Those 6 months abroad taught me more about coffee culture than any classroom could have. I visited Italian espresso bars before dawn, apprenticed with a third-generation roaster in Vienna, and filled journals with ideas that would eventually revolutionize our family business, if only I'd been given the chance. When I returned, the disappointment at home was palpable. My father had already begun grooming Olivia, despite her complete lack of interest in coffee. "She follows through on commitments," he told me pointedly. The art gallery came next, my attempt to bring specialty coffee and local art together in one space. I invested $30,000 of my savings only to watch it fail when the location proved problematic. My father never let me forget it. "Another Abby special," he'd say when business conversations turned to risk assessment. "All vision, no practical sense." Still, I persisted. I joined the family business at the lowest level, barista, and worked my way up. I learned inventory management by arriving at 4 a.m. to receive deliveries. I mastered the roasting process by staying late, experimenting with beans others had dismissed. I built relationships with every employee, from the delivery drivers to the bookkeepers. Meanwhile, Olivia graduated with honors from Stanford Business School and walked directly into a management position. While I had spent years learning our business from the ground up, She stepped in with theories and MBA jargon that impressed our father but confused our veteran staff. Olivia understands the big picture, my father would say during meetings where my ideas were dismissed. You're too focused on details, Abby. But those details mattered. When I discovered one of our suppliers was selling us substandard beans at premium prices, it was my attention to detail that saved the company thousands. When our flagship location faced closure due to rent increases, it was my relationship with the building owner, built through hundreds of early morning conversations over espresso, that secured us favorable terms. My victories were acknowledged with brief nods. My mistakes, immortalized as evidence of my irresponsible nature. The tattoo I got at 22, a small coffee plant on my wrist, became another strike against me. Unprofessional, my father declared, though customers often noticed it and asked about our sourcing practices, opening doors to meaningful conversations about sustainability. Despite everything, I loved our business with a passion that bordered on obsession. Every new cafe opening felt like watching a child take their first steps. Every customer who closed their eyes in appreciation of our signature roast validated the countless hours I'd spent perfecting it. I wasn't just working for my father's approval anymore. I was working for something larger than all of us. If only he could have seen that before making the decision, that would change everything. The call came on a Tuesday. Family meeting tomorrow. Dad's office. 9 a.m. My mother's voice was tense, holding something back. Abby, just come with an open mind, okay? That night, sleep evaded me. My father had been acting strangely for weeks, canceling meetings, disappearing for long lunches with Olivia, meeting with lawyers. Something was happening, and I'd been deliberately excluded. I arrived early, my stomach knotted with dread. The headquarters of Parker & Daughters occupied the top floor of a brick building overlooking Pike Place Market. Close enough to our humble beginnings that my father could point to his original coffee cart location and remind everyone how far we'd come. My mother sat beside my father, her hands fidgeting with a tissue. Olivia arrived precisely on time, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed corporate success. I suddenly felt underdressed in my practical black pants and company polo, the clothes I wore for actual coffee work, not just boardroom appearances. I'll get straight to the point, my father began, his voice steady despite the paleness of his face. I've been diagnosed with stage 2 pancreatic cancer. The world tilted. My father, the indestructible force who worked 14-hour days and never even caught colds, was seriously ill. I reached for his hand across the table, but he continued as if we were discussing quarterly projections rather than his mortality. Treatment begins next week. The doctors are optimistic, but I need to step back from day-to-day operations. He straightened a stack of papers with military precision. This business needs strong leadership, especially now. Hope fluttered in my chest. Dangerous, fragile hope. I'd been preparing for this moment my entire life. I knew every aspect of our operation, from bean sourcing to balance sheets. I'd earned this, despite every dismissal and doubt. I've made my decision after careful consideration, my father continued, his eyes briefly meeting mine before sliding away. Olivia will assume the role of CEO, effective immediately. The room didn't exactly spin, but something inside me certainly did, a violent recalibration of my reality. Olivia looked simultaneously triumphant and apologetic, a combination I hadn't known was possible until that moment. Dad, I managed, my voice embarrassingly thin. I've been with the company for 7 years. I've worked every position. I know our suppliers, our customers, This isn't about experience, Abby. He cut me off with a wave of his hand. It's about temperament, about consistency, about responsibility. He emphasized the last word like a judge pronouncing a sentence. You're too irresponsible. I can't trust you with the family business. 5 words. Just 5 words to summarize all he thought of me. Not my dedication, not my innovations, not the relationships I'd built or problems I'd solved, just the mistakes, the detours, the ways I'd failed to be Olivia. Robert, my mother interjected, her voice strained. Abby has grown so much. She's proven herself time and again. The decision is made, Susan. My father's tone left no room for debate. The board has already approved it. The board, of course. The carefully selected friends and relatives who would never contradict Robert Parker. This meeting wasn't an announcement, it was a formality. My fate had been decided long before I entered the room. "What about me?" I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. "What's my role in all this?" My father exchanged a glance with Olivia, a conspirator's look that confirmed they'd discussed this without me. "You'll remain Director of Product Development," Olivia said smoothly. "Your knowledge of coffee is valuable, Abby. We don't want to lose that." A consolation prize. A meaningless title designed to keep me contained while they reshaped the company in their image. I sat there, nodding mechanically as they outlined the transition plan, feeling like I was watching the scene from outside my body. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd believed about my future, disintegrated in minutes. The meeting concluded with handshakes and forced smiles. My mother hugged me too tightly, whispering apologies she didn't have the courage to voice publicly. Olivia promised we'd talk more later, as if casual conversation could repair what had just been broken. My father simply nodded as I left, already moving on to the next item on his agenda. In the elevator down to the street, I pressed my forehead against the cool metal wall and allowed myself exactly 30 seconds to fall apart. 30 seconds of silent screaming, of rage so pure it frightened me. Then I straightened up, wiped my eyes, and walked out into the Seattle rain. I'd been judged and found wanting by the person whose opinion mattered most to me. What do you do with that kind of rejection? Where do you put it so it doesn't poison everything else in your life? Have you ever had someone's lack of faith in you become a self-fulfilling prophecy? Have you felt yourself becoming the very person they accused you of being, simply because fighting against that image became too exhausting? If you've been there, if you're there now, drop a comment below. Sometimes just knowing we're not alone in these struggles makes them a little more bearable. The weeks following my father's announcement blurred together like Seattle's endless rainy days. Each morning, I dragged myself to an office that no longer felt like mine, to a company rapidly transforming under Olivia's leadership. My official title, Director of Product Development, sounded impressive on paper. The reality was hollow. Emails went unanswered. I wasn't invited to strategic planning meetings. Decisions about our core product, the coffee itself, were made without my input. "We're moving toward automation in roasting," Olivia announced during one of the few meetings I was still included in. "The inconsistency in hand roasting doesn't align with our expansion goals." I nearly choked. The inconsistency is what our customers love. It's craftsmanship, not a flaw. The market research suggests otherwise. She didn't even look up from her tablet. "We're bringing in consultants next week." The consultants arrived, sleek, expensive, and completely ignorant about coffee culture. They spoke of beverage solutions and liquid consumption habits while avoiding actual coffee tasting. When I tried to explain why our small batch approach mattered, I was politely but firmly shut down. "We appreciate your passion, Abby," the lead consultant said with a practiced smile, "but the numbers don't support your position." The numbers, always the numbers, as if you could reduce the perfect espresso to a spreadsheet. Longtime employees began disappearing next. Marco, our head roaster for 15 years, was replaced by a recent graduate with a degree in food science. Denise, who managed our original location and knew every regular by name, was restructured out of her position. These were more than colleagues, they were family who had watched me grow up. "Your sister's cleaning house?" Marco told me on his last day, packing the hand-carved tamper I'd given him years ago. "Better watch your back." I didn't have to watch for long. 3 months after Olivia's promotion, she called me into her office, my father's old office, now redecorated in minimalist gray. "We're reorganizing the product team," she said without preamble. "Your role is being absorbed into the broader marketing structure." "You're firing me?" The words felt surreal. "Of course not. We're offering you a new position, brand ambassador." She pushed a folder across the desk. "You'll represent Parker & Daughters at events, trade shows. Your people skills are an asset." I didn't open the folder. Brand ambassador, a glorified mascot role. No authority, no input, just smiling for photos while others made the real decisions. "This is because I oppose the automated roasting, isn't it?" Olivia sighed, removing her designer glasses. For a moment, I glimpsed something like regret in her eyes. "This is business, Abby. Dad put me in charge because he trusts my judgment. If you can't support the company's direction, maybe it's better that I what? Disappear? Stop embarrassing the family with my outdated ideas about what our company should be? That's not fair. Her voice hardened. I'm trying to secure our future. The market is changing. The market doesn't want another soulless coffee chain, Liv. They want what makes us special. That's your opinion. The board disagrees. I stood up, suddenly clear about what I needed to do. Keep the ambassador title. I quit. Later that day, I packed my desk into a single cardboard box, 7 years reduced to some photos, a few notebooks, and a bag of my experimental roast. No one stopped by to say goodbye. Word traveled fast in a company built on gossip and fear. That night, I called my mother, expecting sympathy or at least understanding. Instead, I got excuses. Your father is struggling with his treatment, Abby. Olivia's trying her best under difficult circumstances. Maybe if you were more patient. More patient? Mom, they're dismantling everything Dad built, everything I've worked for. They're modernizing, she corrected gently. Change is hard but necessary. So you agree with what they're doing, with how they're treating me? Her silence was answer enough. I hung up and stared at my apartment walls. My life had revolved around Parker and Daughters for so long that without it, I felt adrift. Purposeless. Every coffee shop in Seattle knew the Parker family. Every industry connection traced back to my father. My identity had been so completely entangled with the family business that without it, I wasn't sure who Abigail Parker actually was. Depression settled over me like a fog. I stopped answering calls, first from friends, then from my mother. I scrolled through job listings without applying, convinced that any potential employer already knew I was irresponsible. Damaged goods in Seattle's close-knit coffee community. On my darkest days, I wondered if my father had been right all along. Maybe I was too impulsive, too emotional for business leadership. Maybe Olivia's cold efficiency was what the company truly needed. The thought hollowed me out, leaving nothing but doubt and self-recrimination. 3 months passed this way. My savings dwindled. My apartment, once a source of pride as my first adult purchase, began to feel like a prison. Every morning brought the same question. What now? What happens when the person you built yourself around decides you're not good enough? I had no answer, only the bitter taste of rejection that even the best coffee couldn't wash away. Rock bottom arrived on a Thursday evening, 6 months after my resignation. My bank account hovered dangerously close to empty. Job applications disappeared into the void of corporate HR departments. Even my mother's calls had become less frequent, as if my failure was contagious. That night, searching for my passport for a job application, I discovered a shoebox of old photographs pushed to the back of my closet. Inside, beneath family vacation snapshots and school portraits, I found it. A faded Polaroid of my father standing proudly beside his original coffee cart. He couldn't have been more than 25, my age when he deemed me too irresponsible to follow in his footsteps. In the photo, his hair was longer than I'd ever seen it, his smile wider. The cart itself was nothing special, dented in places with a hand-painted sign reading simply Parker's Coffee. But his eyes held something I recognized, the same wild determination I saw in my own mirror. I sat on my bedroom floor, staring at this younger version of Robert Parker. What would that young man think of what his company had become? Of the automated roasting processes and consultants with their spreadsheets? What would he think of the daughter who shared his passion being pushed aside? The realization hit me with startling clarity. My father's greatest achievement wasn't the business empire he built. It was the courage to start with nothing but a dream and a coffee cart. He had been my age, broke, unproven, probably terrified, when he took that first step. No business degree, no family connections, no safety net, just passion and determination. How ironic that the qualities he once embodied, risk-taking, intuition, bold vision, were the very traits he now dismissed as irresponsible in me. The next morning I did something I hadn't done in months. I got up early, showered, and dressed with purpose. I walked 6 blocks to Horizon Coffee, a tiny independent shop struggling to compete with the bigger chains, including my family's. The owner, Elena, had once tried to poach me from Parker and Daughters. I declined out of loyalty to my father. That loyalty now seemed tragically misplaced. I need a job, I told her without preamble. barista, cleaner, whatever you've got. I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired. Elena studied me, her head tilted skeptically. You're a Parker. Why would you want to work here? I'm not a Parker anymore, just Abby. And I need to start somewhere. She hired me on the spot. Partly from curiosity, I suspected, about having a Parker making lattes in her shop. The pay was minimal, barely covering my rent, but it was a lifeline when I needed it most. The work was familiar, yet humbling. I arrived at 5 a.m. to prep machines and set up pastry displays. I served customers who sometimes recognized me. Aren't you Robert Parker's daughter? And others who had no idea they were being served by someone who had once helped develop the roasts for the biggest competitor in town. During slow periods, I observed Elena's operation with fresh eyes. Her small business faced challenges my family's company had long forgotten. The struggle to source quality beans at affordable prices, the battle for customer loyalty against massive chains, the constant innovation required to stay relevant. I began taking online courses in the evenings. Business management, sustainable sourcing practices, digital marketing. Not the prestigious MBA program my father had once expected me to complete, but practical knowledge for the path I was beginning to envision. You're different from what I expected, Elena told me one night as we closed up. I thought you'd be entitled, impatient, but you work like someone with something to prove. I do have something to prove, I admitted, to myself more than anyone else. Over the next year, I rebuilt myself from the ground up. I saved every possible dollar, cutting expenses to the bone. I networked with other young entrepreneurs at industry events, absorbing their stories of failure and resurrection. I studied the changing coffee market, noting the growing demand for sustainability, transparency, and authenticity. Values my family's business had once championed before Olivia's corporate rebrand. Most importantly, I reconnected with farmers and suppliers I'd known from my Parker and Daughters days. Many were unhappy with how the company had changed, with payment terms stretched and personal relationships replaced by automated purchasing systems. Your father understood that good coffee is about people, not just beans, Jorge from Colombia told me during a video call. We miss the old Parker way. The old Parker way. The words echoed in my mind, sparking an idea that grew stronger each day. 1 year after finding that photo of my father's coffee cart, I stood in a small, abandoned warehouse space in Capitol Hill. The concrete floor was stained, the windows grimy, but the rent was within my budget. Barely. The landlord, an elderly man named Frank, seemed dubious about my business plan. Another coffee shop? Seattle's drowning in them already. Not a shop, I corrected, vision clear in my mind. A roastery. Small batch, sustainable, direct trade coffee, the way it should be done. He scratched his head. And you've got funding for this venture? I thought about my savings account, built dollar by dollar from barista tips and ruthless budgeting. Not enough, not nearly enough, but a start. I've got everything I need. I lied with the confidence my father would have recognized. The same confidence he'd had standing beside that battered coffee cart 30 years earlier. Frank signed the lease, and Parker Sustainable Coffee was born. Not as a rejection of my family's legacy, but as a return to its original values. Have you ever found yourself starting over completely? Rebuilding from nothing after a devastating setback? Did you discover strengths you never knew you had? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. The first 6 months of Parker Sustainable Coffee nearly broke me, physically, financially, emotionally. I worked 20-hour days, sleeping on a cot in the back room to save both time and rent money. Every piece of equipment was secondhand, patched together with determination and duct tape. My roaster, the heart of any coffee operation, was a refurbished Probat from the 1980s that I'd purchased from a bankrupt cafe in Portland. She's temperamental, the previous owner warned as we loaded it onto a rented truck. But if you listen to her, she'll give you the best roast you've ever tasted. He was right on both counts. The ancient machine had quirks that required constant attention, temperature fluctuations, uneven gas flow, mysterious clicking noises that started and stopped without pattern. But when everything aligned, the coffee it produced was extraordinary, complex, nuanced, with a depth that automated systems couldn't replicate. My first employees were friends who believed in me enough to work for practically nothing. Carlos, a former Parker and Daughters barista who'd quit after Olivia's restructuring, handled logistics and deliveries. May, a graphic design student I'd met at Horizon Coffee, created our branding and packaging in exchange for free coffee and the promise of future payment. We focused exclusively on wholesale at first, supplying small restaurants and independent cafes that wanted something different from the increasingly corporate offerings dominating Seattle. Our pitch was simple: transparency in sourcing, sustainability in practices, and exceptional quality in every batch. The rejection letters outnumbered the acceptances 10 to 1. Too expensive. Too small to guarantee consistent supply. Not established enough. Each no felt like personal validation of my father's assessment. Too irresponsible, too idealistic, too impractical. 4 months in, disaster struck. Our ancient roaster broke down completely during a crucial production run for our biggest client yet, a boutique hotel chain that had taken a chance on us. Carlos and I worked through the night, dismantling the machine by flashlight, searching for replacement parts online, and finally jerry-rigging a solution that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. We delivered the order 6 hours late, with apology pastries and my personal guarantee that this would never happen again. I expected anger, cancellation, confirmation of my inadequacy. Instead, the hotel's food and beverage director, a veteran of the industry, laughed. Robert Parker's daughter pulling all-nighters to fix her own equipment? Now that's a coffee company I want to work with. It was the first time anyone had compared me to my father in a way that didn't feel like criticism. Slowly, painfully, we gained traction. Our reputation for quality and ethics began to spread through Seattle's close-knit culinary community. A favorable mention in a local food blog led to inquiries from restaurants I'd once only dreamed of supplying. Our tiny team expanded to 5, then 8. I invested every penny of profit back into the business, upgrading equipment, improving our workspace, developing new roast profiles. The cot in the back room remained, but I used it less frequently as operations stabilized. Throughout it all, I maintained radio silence with my family. My mother left occasional voicemails, hesitant, careful messages that never directly mentioned my father or Olivia. I couldn't bring myself to return her calls. The wound was still too raw, the fear of disapproval too great. I did, however, follow Parker and Daughters from afar. Industry gossip and the occasional news article painted a concerning picture. Olivia's aggressive expansion into new markets was stretching resources thin. The shift to automated roasting had affected quality, with longtime customers noting the difference. Employee turnover had reached unprecedented levels. I took no pleasure in these reports. Despite everything, I still cared about my father's legacy, about the business that had shaped my childhood and defined my ambitions. But I focused on my own path, applying the lessons I'd learned from both my father's successes and his failures. The true breakthrough came 18 months after I signed the warehouse lease. A major regional grocery chain was seeking to expand its specialty coffee selection, focusing specifically on sustainable, ethically sourced brands. The buyer, a woman named Sarah who had previously worked with Parker and Daughters, reached out directly. "I've been watching what you're building," she said during our meeting. "It reminds me of what your family's company used to stand for." The contract she offered would triple our production overnight. A terrifying proposition for our small operation, but the opportunity we'd been waiting for. I spent a sleepless week running calculations, consulting with my team, and ultimately making the biggest decision of my professional life. "We'll do it," I told Sarah, "but we'll scale on our terms. Quality doesn't get compromised. Sourcing remains ethical. We'll meet your volume needs, but not at the expense of what makes us different." She smiled. "That's exactly why we chose Parker Sustainable Coffee." Parker. My name, my identity, reclaimed on my own terms. The grocery chain contract changed everything. We moved to a larger facility. We hired experienced staff, including 2 roasters I trained personally in our methods. We developed new packaging, new products, new relationships with farmers across the coffee-growing world. Through it all, I maintained the values that had driven me from the beginning: transparency, sustainability, and an uncompromising commitment to quality. The same values my father had instilled in me. even if he'd lost sight of them himself. 3 years after being told I was too irresponsible to lead, I stood at the head of a thriving company with 20 employees, contracts with Seattle's most prestigious establishments, and a reputation for integrity that couldn't be bought at any price. I had proven myself, not to my father, but to myself, and that, I discovered, was what mattered most. The call came on a Tuesday evening, just as I was locking up after a marathon production day. 20 pallets of our signature espresso blend were being shipped to Portland the next morning, our first major expansion beyond Seattle. The team had celebrated with champagne before heading home, leaving me alone with the satisfaction of a milestone achieved. When my phone lit up with my mother's name, my first instinct was still to let it go to voicemail. 3 years of minimal contact had become a habit, a protective barrier around the life I'd rebuilt. But something, intuition perhaps, made me answer. "Abby?" My mother's voice was thin, fragile in a way I'd never heard before. "Abby, we need you." The words sent a chill through me. Not "how are you" or "we miss you," but "we need you," an admission of vulnerability from the family that had deemed me inadequate. "What's happened?" I asked, already reaching for my keys. "It's everything," she said, her composure cracking. "Your father's cancer is back, the business is failing, Olivia is... she's not handling it well. Please, Abby, please come home." Home. The word struck me as both foreign and achingly familiar. I hadn't set foot in my parents' house since the day I quit Parker and Daughters. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said, surprising myself with the lack of hesitation. The drive to my parents' lakeside home in Madison Park felt like traveling back in time. The same winding roads, the same glimpses of water between expensive houses, the same knot in my stomach as I approached the family estate. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She'd aged more than 3 years should allow. New lines around her eyes, silver threads prominent in her once dark hair. She hugged me fiercely, whispering, "Thank you," against my hair like a prayer. Inside, the house was unnervingly quiet. Family photos still lined the hallway, including several of me that I'd half expected to be removed. In the living room, my father sat in his favorite leather chair, a blanket across his legs despite the warm evening. He looked diminished, his commanding presence reduced by illness and worry. "Abigail," he said, using my full name as he always had in serious moments. "You came. Mom said you needed me." I remained standing, uncertain of my place in this familiar yet foreign terrain. "Sit down," he gestured to the couch. "There's a lot to discuss." As the evening light faded over Lake Washington, my parents outlined the crisis facing Parker and Daughters. Olivia's aggressive expansion had backfired spectacularly. New locations in Portland and Vancouver had hemorrhaged money. An expensive rebranding campaign had alienated loyal customers without attracting new ones. The shift to automated roasting had reduced quality while increasing maintenance costs. "Where's Olivia now?" I asked, noting her absence. My mother and father exchanged glances. "At the office," my father finally said. "She's been working 18-hour days trying to fix things. She won't listen to anyone, won't admit the severity of the situation." The irony wasn't lost on me. The responsible daughter was now driving the family business toward bankruptcy, while the irresponsible one had built a thriving company from scratch. "The board is meeting next week to discuss options," my father continued, "including selling to Meridian Coffee Corp." I couldn't hide my shock. "Meridian? They're everything you always stood against. They'd gut the company, keep the name, and destroy everything that made Parker and Daughters special." "We don't have many options left, Abby." For the first time in my life, I heard defeat in Robert Parker's voice. It was more disturbing than his illness, this surrender from a man who had never accepted limitations. "What exactly are you asking of me?" The question had been building since my mother's call. Why now, after 3 years of silence? What did they expect from the daughter they'd discarded? My father straightened in his chair, some of his old authority returning. "We want you to come back, to help save the company." The request hung in the air between us, monumental in its implications. 3 years ago, I would have given anything to hear those words. Now they filled me with conflicting emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also suspicion and a deep, complicated anger. "You didn't want me when the company was successful," I said quietly. "Now you want me to clean up Olivia's mess?" That's not fair, Abby, my mother interjected. We've always wanted you. You just didn't trust me, I finished for her. You just thought I was irresponsible, impulsive, unworthy. My father's gaze dropped to his hands, older now, spotted with age, but still the hands that had built an empire and then denied me my place in it. I was wrong, he said, the words clearly costing him. About you. About what the company needed. About many things. In all my imagined reconciliations, I'd never pictured my father admitting error. The unexpected acknowledgement disarmed me, melting some of the ice I'd carefully maintained around my heart. I need to think about this, I said, rising to leave. This isn't a simple decision. My mother walked me to the door, her hand gripping mine with desperate strength. We're so proud of what you've built, Abby. Your company, your success. We should have told you sooner. The words I'd longed to hear for years now came too late, too conveniently aligned with their need. Yet they pierced me all the same. How did you know about my company? I asked. I'd never spoken to them about Parker Sustainable Coffee. My mother smiled sadly. We've followed everything you've done. Your father has a subscription to your coffee. He says it's better than ours ever was. The revelation followed me home, complicating my anger, softening my resolve to remain distant. The image of my father, proud, stubborn Robert Parker, quietly ordering coffee from the daughter he'd rejected, was almost too painful to contemplate. Have you ever been in this position, suddenly needed by the very people who once dismissed you? How do you balance the satisfaction of vindication with the complicated pull of family ties? Let me know in the comments if you faced a similar crossroads and how you navigated it. For 3 days I wrestled with my parents' request. My team at Parker Sustainable Coffee noticed my distraction, my unusual silence during meetings. Carlos finally cornered me in my office, concern evident in his expression. What's going on, Abby? You've been somewhere else all week. I told him everything. My father's illness, the family business crisis, the request for help. As a former Parker and Daughters employee who'd left under Olivia's regime, he had his own complicated feelings about the situation. They're only calling you because they're desperate, he pointed out, echoing my own thoughts. Where were they when we were sleeping on cots and fixing that damn roaster at 3 a.m.? He was right, of course, but as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about my parents or Olivia. It was about the hundreds of employees whose livelihoods depended on Parker and Daughters. It was about my father's legacy, flawed as it was, and the values the company had once represented. On the 4th day, I made my decision. I would help, but on my terms. The Parker and Daughters headquarters had changed since my departure. The warm, coffee-centric decor had been replaced with sleek corporate minimalism. The lobby, once filled with the aroma of fresh-brewed coffee, now smelled faintly of synthetic air freshener. At the reception desk, not a single employee recognized me. I'm here to see Olivia Parker, I told the young man behind the counter. Do you have an appointment? He asked without looking up. Tell her Abby's here. She'll see me. Minutes later, I was escorted to the executive floor, my father's domain, now Olivia's. She was waiting in the conference room, surrounded by spreadsheets and empty coffee cups. Like our mother, she showed the strain of recent years, designer clothes hanging slightly loose, dark circles beneath expertly applied makeup. You actually came, she said, surprise evident in her voice. I told Dad you wouldn't. Hello to you too, Liv. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. 3 years of unspoken words, accusations, and regrets filling the space. So, she finally said, gesturing to the chaos of papers before her. Come to witness the train wreck? Mom said you needed help. Olivia laughed bitterly. That's an understatement. We're 6 months from bankruptcy unless something changes dramatically. She pushed a financial report across the table. See for yourself. The numbers were worse than I'd imagined. Cash reserves depleted, debt at unsustainable levels, sales declining quarter after quarter. Behind the figures, I saw the consequences of abandoned values, of prioritizing expansion over quality, of forgetting what had made Parker and Daughters special in the first place. What happened, Liv? I asked quietly. She stared out the window at the Seattle skyline before answering. I tried to make Dad proud. I tried to build something bigger, more impressive. I listened to consultants and board members and MBA colleagues instead of trusting what I knew about this business. Her voice caught. I thought I was doing the right thing. The admission cracked something between us. For the first time, I saw my sister not as my replacement or rival, but as someone struggling under the weight of our father's expectations, just as I had. "The Meridian offer?" I asked, returning to business. "It's terrible. They'd keep the name, fire most of the staff, and turn us into another soulless chain. But the board is seriously considering it. We're running out of options." I took a deep breath, mentally crossing a threshold I'd never expected to approach again. What if there was another option? Over the next 4 hours, Olivia and I talked more openly than we had in our entire adult lives. I outlined my vision: a merger between Parker and Daughters and Parker Sustainable Coffee. A return to the company's roots while embracing sustainable practices and ethical sourcing. A balanced approach that honored tradition while looking toward the future. "You want to save us by making us more like your company," Olivia observed, not without irony. "I want to save the family legacy by remembering what made it valuable in the first place," I corrected. "It's not about my company versus yours, Liv. It's about combining our strengths." We argued, debated, occasionally shouted. Old wounds reopened, new understandings emerged. By evening, we had the skeleton of a plan: ambitious, risky, but potentially transformative. "The board won't easily approve this," Olivia warned as we wrapped up. "And Dad, he'll have opinions." "Let me worry about Dad," I said, gathering my notes. "You focus on keeping things afloat until we can implement the changes." My father was waiting when I arrived at the family home that night. Despite the late hour and his illness, he sat fully dressed in his study, as if preparing for a formal business meeting. "Olivia called," he said as I entered. "She tells me you have a plan." "I do." I sat across from him, meeting his gaze directly. "But before we discuss it, we need to clear the air." For the next hour, I said everything I'd held inside for 3 years: the pain of his rejection, the damage of his dismissal, the struggle to rebuild my life and confidence after being labeled irresponsible. I spoke without anger, but with complete honesty, laying bare the consequences of his judgment. He listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When I finished, the silence stretched between us, filled with decades of complicated history. "I was afraid," he finally said, the admission clearly difficult for him. "Not of your failure, Abigail, but of my own. I saw myself in you, the risk-taker, the dreamer, the one who follows intuition over convention, and I remembered how close I came to losing everything in the early days." He leaned forward, suddenly looking very old and very tired. "I thought I was protecting you by pushing you away from that path. I thought Olivia's caution would serve the company better than your passion. I was wrong on both counts." The apology I'd longed for came without the satisfaction I'd expected. Instead, I felt a profound sadness for all the wasted years, the unnecessary pain, the relationship we might have had. "I don't need your protection, Dad. I never did. I needed your trust. And now I'm asking for yours," he replied. "To let you help save what I built, what I kept you from inheriting." The irony isn't lost on me. Despite everything, I found myself smiling slightly. Well, irresponsibility runs in the family, apparently. A ghost of his old smile appeared in response. "Your mother always said you got it from me." 1 year later, I stood on the small stage erected in our flagship cafe, surrounded by employees from both companies, now unified under the banner of Parker Family Coffee Roasters. The anniversary celebration marked not just 60 years since my father's first coffee cart, but 1 year since the merger that had saved his legacy. The transition hadn't been easy. The board initially resisted our plan, preferring the clean exit of Meridian's buyout offer. It took all of Olivia's corporate negotiation skills and all of my passionate advocacy to convince them that our vision was viable. Implementing the changes required painful decisions. We closed underperforming locations, streamlined operations, and refocused on quality over quantity. Some employees chose to leave. Others embraced the new direction with enthusiasm. We reintroduced hand roasting alongside more efficient processes, finding a balance between craftsmanship and scale. Throughout it all, Olivia and I discovered something unexpected. We worked remarkably well together. Her analytical mind complemented my creative instincts. Her attention to structure, balanced my focus on experience. We weren't just sisters, repairing a fractured relationship. We were business partners, leveraging each other's strengths. My father watched our progress from a slight distance, his health improving enough for weekly visits to the roastery, but not for day-to-day involvement. He offered advice when asked, but otherwise allowed us the freedom to reshape the company as we saw fit, a trust he'd never fully extended to either of us before. Now, as I prepared to address the gathered employees, partners, and family members, I caught his eye in the front row. He nodded slightly, a gesture that contained a universe of meaning between us. 60 years ago, I began, Robert Parker started selling coffee from a cart not far from where we stand today. He had no business plan, no investors, no safety net, just passion and determination and a belief that Seattle deserved better coffee. Appreciative laughter rippled through the crowd. That spirit, of taking chances, of believing in quality above all else, of treating customers and farmers with equal respect, built this company. Along the way, that spirit sometimes got lost in the pursuit of growth or profit or conventional success, but it was never truly gone. I glanced at Olivia, who stood to my right, and then to my father, whose eyes never left my face. This past year has taught me that success isn't measured by titles or profits alone. It's measured by integrity, by resilience, by the courage to admit when you're wrong, and the strength to forge a new path. Parker Family Coffee Roasters stands here today because we remembered who we are and what we value. As I continued the speech, announcing our new farmer support initiative and expanded sustainability goals, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The rejection that had once devastated me had ultimately forced me to discover my own strength, to build something authentic, to become someone who didn't need external validation to know her worth. After the formal presentations, as employees and guests mingled over coffee and pastries, my father approached me. He moved more slowly now, his illness having taken a permanent toll, but his eyes were clear and present. "You did it, Abby," he said simply. "You saved everything." I shook my head. "We did it, all of us, even you with your terrible timing." He raised an eyebrow. "Terrible timing? If you hadn't called me irresponsible and given the company to Olivia, I never would have built my own business. I never would have learned what I was capable of. So I did you a favor?" His tone was incredulous, but a smile played at the corners of his mouth. Let's call it an unintentionally valuable life lesson. I took his arm as we moved toward the family table where my mother and Olivia waited. The best mistakes are the ones that lead us where we needed to go all along. As I settled into my chair, looking around at the bustling cafe filled with employees whose livelihoods were secure again, at customers enjoying coffee roasted with care and integrity, at my family, imperfect but reconnected, I realized that true vindication isn't about proving others wrong, it's about proving yourself right. Even when, especially when, no one else believes in you. Have you ever found that rejection led you to unexpected strength? That what seemed like your worst moment actually set you on a better path? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more journeys of family karma and unexpected redemption. Because sometimes, the words that break us become the foundation on which we rebuild ourselves, stronger, wiser, and finally free from others' definitions of who we are.